So we're just waiting for at least 2 more members of the committee to join us. We've got 4, and we need at least 2 more before we have quorum and we can begin our meeting. So if you're in the building, members of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, please come out and join us in Committee Room 1. Okay. So good morning, everyone. We have a quorum. Welcome to meeting number 6 of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. We do have an agenda before us, and let's just go through some of the items. But before I do that, can I have, there's a call for declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And seeing none, can I just also have a roll call this morning? What we'd like to do is just have everyone who's sitting in front of a microphone and who is also staff who's helping us with the meeting, just identify themselves by first name, last name, and department if you can, and we'll go from there. So it's Kristen Wong-Tam, Chair of the committee.
Nicole Cormier, Accessibility Consultant with Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights Office.
Rahima Mullah, co-chair.
Archie Allison.
Do you want to go this way? Jan Stick, City Clerk's office. Yin, you're next.
Yin Brown.
Shelley Carroll, councillor from Ward 33, and also a TTC commissioner, which I think will help with that item today.
Marie Belanger, Toronto Public Library.
Thank you. I'm just going to move to the left side of the room here. We're just doing a quick introduction around the chamber here. Great. So thank you very much. Yeah, so Melissa, welcome back. She's my EA who was away for maternity leave. So we've called for declarations. If I can have someone to move for the confirmation of the minutes from October 27th, our last meeting. Okay, Archie, so moved and received, adopted. Let's go through our agenda. So there is a list of speakers that are presented before you on the green paper, but the agenda as we have it before us today, we've got a number of items. The first item is the chair's report, which I will come back to. We will deal with that shortly. Our second item is DI 6.2, the curbside management strategy, currently on hold for staff presentations. Third item is DI 6.3, which is an update on the recruitment process for the new term of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. We're also going to hold that for a presentation, as well as we do have a speaker. The following item is DI 6.4, accessible bus route for Eglinton Avenue East and Rumsey Road. And we do not have a speaker for that, but I suspect that we do have Yeah, so I do believe we have TTC, is TTC staff in the room at the moment? Will we be receiving an update on this? No? Okay, so why don't we hold this down in case they do come and join us? Yeah, I want to hold it down anyway. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. We're going to hold that down for Councillor Carroll. The following item is DI 6.5, accessibility at the new men's emergency shelter at 850 and 854 Bloor Street West, and we're going to hold that for speakers. And then I believe the second last item is DI 6.6, City of Toronto recruitment strategy. Again, it's held down for speakers. And our final item is DI 6.7, Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, our 2016 meeting dates. And everybody has taken note of the dates that are being outlined for our 2016 meeting. I think that we could probably just move to adopt this now, to receive for information. Who would like to move to receive? Okay, Yin? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so heading back to item number 1, the chair's report. So we've had there's been a few activity. I can't say it's been a lot, but what I have before you with respect to a quick report is some actions I think are crucial to the work of the committee. So I wrote a letter to the executive director of MLS regarding accessibility with respect to Uber. And there is a report, as many people are aware, that is coming back to council in spring 2016. It should be a very robust debate again before us. And in advance of that report coming back, my letter to Tracy Cook, who's the executive director of MLS, just basically once again stressed the importance of accessibility and wanting to make sure that it was going to be in the accessibility framework as they move forward. I think there's going to be lots of discussion about whether or not private passenger vehicles that are operating under the Uber system will ultimately be accessible. And if they're going to be part of the ground transportation system in the city, then I don't believe that they can be exempt from offering accessible services with respect to vehicles. Another matter that I undertook on behalf of the committee was at the last council meeting, which just took place last week, I put a motion on the agenda along with TTC Chair Josh Cole. And essentially, there was a vote in earlier this year where the City of Brampton, City's Council had refused the proposed route for their LRT extension through their city. It's called the Huron-Ontario Main LRT route. It's now been revised. It's no longer called that anymore. But the funds were, basically, the route was rejected by City Council, and the mayor of Brampton was on record of saying if you don't use the funds, you'll lose the funds. And there were a number of other cities now formalizing actions to gain access to what is now available dollars in the quantum of possibly $200 to $400 million. So recognizing that there was going to be movement from Oakville, Cambridge, Burlington, Hamilton, London, Kitchener, Waterloo, requests that were going to come in for that money, we put a request in on behalf of City Council asking that the money be allocated for TTC accessibility. So this would hopefully help us speed up the AODA requirements well before 2015. It's been reported that the Premier and the Minister of Transportation will make that final decision, and it's supposed to be coming soon. But nevertheless, we got our request in there. So rather than asking for money to start a new project, the reality is that unless you actually have the TTC system currently fully accessible, it doesn't matter if you have the downtown relief line or the regional express rail or smart track if you can't get to those new systems. So the existing system has to be updated. So that request went in, and I think what we can do out of this committee is to think about what are the individual actions that could take place by the respective organizations that the members represent. Is there particular follow-up actions with respect to support letters that can be submitted to sort of supplement the work the council has now done, which is to make the ask. And it's not a small quantum. It certainly won't meet the needs of accessibility for TTC, which is in the quantum of $500 million, but it could certainly get us there a lot faster. And then finally, there's a letter that is going out as chair. I'm sending this letter to the city manager, and this letter is asking the city manager to distribute the request to all the divisions, and is to basically ask them to scan their agenda on items that we may have interest in commenting on. So therefore, any particular issues and policy that are being discussed at the City of Toronto, if it requires an accessibility lens, then we're asking them to flag that for us and to send this to committee for comments. I think that in the past, the committee members have expressed a real desire to be ahead of the consultation process, as opposed to asking us when all the decisions have been made. And so that is something that has also now gone out. And that concludes my report. Can I have a mover to receive the report? Thank you, Yen, our most active member so far. Okay, so we are heading on to item number 2, curbside management strategy, and we do have a presentation from staff, and I see Stephen Buckley just jumping and chomping at the bits, our General Manager of Transportation. Welcome to the committee.
Morning. Thank you. Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Steve Buckley. I'm the General Manager of Transportation Services, and thanks for giving us some time today. So what I'm here to speak about is we're about to kick off our public outreach for what we are calling the curbside management strategy. And could we get the slides up? There we go. So the first slide we have here is just an overview, my name, and an image also of a location in the downtown core where we've instituted motorcycle parking zones, along with some regular general purpose vehicular parking zones. So it's just an image showing that these are some of the different changes that we're starting to see in the downtown core. So the first slide, what is curbside management? And again, we have an image here of another sort of pilot we've been running for courier delivery zones that we've established in the downtown core. So what we've been trying to do is, because of the need, the intensification of development and the need for additional sort of just-in-time deliveries within the downtown, and a focus on the impacts of illegal parking and what it does to things such as streetcar routes, we've been working actively with the Courier Delivery Association to try to identify locations where we can give courier deliveries spaces to park to make daytime deliveries that will be hopefully less impactful than having them park illegally on major routes. So the image here is showing one of the side streets in the downtown core where we've identified a courier delivery zone. So in general, the challenges we face here are that we are seeing increasing intensification of development in the downtown core, both residential and commercial. We're seeing changing patterns of usage. A lot of things such as just-in-time deliveries are becoming more important for business operations. We're seeing locational changes of uses as well. So we now have parts of town that perhaps have not historically had a lot of uses, might have been used primarily as parking locations, might have been industrial back in the day. We're seeing them suddenly sprout several million square feet of residential and commercial development, which is putting additional traffic pressure and curbside pressure on those sites as well. We're seeing time of day changes. So we are seeing things like the extension of rush hour. Everywhere throughout the City of Toronto, we've historically considered rush hour to be 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. The reality is most rush hours actually in certain parts start before 4 p.m. and actually extend often to 7 p.m. So we're looking at opportunities to sort of be flexible with that curb space. And finally, again, we also, as in any dynamic city, are seeing changing uses throughout the city. So the introduction of things such as new medical facilities, such as new senior housing, often changes what had been the curbside use to having different demands and needs for curbside usage at that site as well. So the goal of this whole study is to better understand and better respond to those changing dynamics within the city, and to see how we're currently using our curb space, how other cities are using that curb space, and how we potentially modify how we use that curb space to be more flexible by the type of usages that we permit and by time of day. So making things a little bit more dynamic. So the study objective, and again, we have a photo here. This is Front Street in front of Union Station, showing how in a location such as this, we often have high taxi demand, which attracts taxis to these locations, whether we want them there or not. So trying to figure out where that demand for taxis are, and again, trying to perhaps assign curbside space so that they can function and keep our transportation system moving. But the study objective is to improve upon the efficiency and effectiveness of our curbside space allocation and usage for all parking and loading activities, and to reduce related congestion in the study area. And I'll talk a little bit about the study area that we are doing at this point in time. So the next slide highlights the study area boundary. To the north, it's Queen, goes north up University to Dundas, goes south down Young to back to Queen, to Jarvis, to Queens Quay, to Bathurst. So primarily it's between Queen and the waterfront and Bathurst and Jarvis. And we've carved off this small space basically to do two things. One, we're looking at implementing new types of policies, new types of curbside usage. So trying to sort of take something like that on citywide would be quite a challenge. So downtown, we probably have the most dynamic need for our curb space. So in the process of putting together policies for this, we're also looking at testing it within this area. And before we do a wider citywide deployment, seeing what works and what doesn't work. So the next slide identifies the process study flow chart. And within here, we just have a few boxes that show how they feed to one another. We're currently in a current stage, which is existing conditions review and outreach and stakeholder engagement. So we're at the very preliminary portions of this study. From this, we're going to be collecting information about how things are being used there, what's working, what's not working. All of that will basically help inform our future conditions review. So what do we see things needing in the future based on new development plans that we're seeing, based on new city plans that are coming online as well. In parallel to that, we're doing a best practice review. So this is sort of a national and international scan of what other cities are doing, what types of programs they've used, what types of curbside restrictions they've put in place, to look at the full menu of the tools at our disposal. And ultimately, from this, what we'll hope to do is start to develop alternative strategies that will then bring back to the public and other stakeholders for comment and input before we do sort of a final curbside mapping and plan. The next slide just highlights sort of some of the competing pressures that we see on curbside uses right now. So I'm quickly just going to run through all of these curbside usage, and I think everyone can sort of figure out and relate to or see how these types of uses place demands in cities and the complexity that we may face in trying to manage and balance the demands of all these users. So obviously we have driving vehicles in the city. To date, we've permitted curbside parking in many of the locations in the downtown. We have a growing network of cycling infrastructure, which is often taking curbside space or restricting curbside access in some locations. We have pedestrian needs in terms of access to and from buildings, facilities, and transfer points to other vehicles. We have couriers and goods movement. We have local businesses who have needs. We have taxis. We have food trucks. We have transit vehicles and riders that we need to accommodate. We have wheel-trans vehicles that we need to accommodate. We have downtown motor coaches. We have accessible parking. We have hotels. We have emergency services. And then we also have a thriving TV and film industry that often puts pressure in the downtown. So the point of identifying these are simply just to highlight the sheer number of users that want to access the curb space. And again, part of our job here is to sort of facilitate and broker and figure out how we can have a system that is both responsive and flexible. So in the next slide, we're highlighting some of the challenges that we face. And obviously, first and foremost is access. Attempting to accommodate all appropriate curbside usages by location and time of day for a sufficient duration. And what that means is that understanding each of these user groups and understanding how we can try to accommodate their need for the times when they're the highest and best use, but also understand that we may need to be flexible. So for instance, there may be locations in the downtown core, and I'll point to the entertainment district, where during the daytime hours, it may be about getting goods and services into the businesses. In the evening hours, the highest and best use might be taxi loading zones. So thinking about how we be a little bit more flexible and not necessarily pick curbside usages that will be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Second is equity. And again, this will be the challenge here, attempting to balance user groups' desire for continued and improved access to increasingly scarce on-street curb space. So again, as we put some additional needs and additional pressures within the city, we will see sort of the need to change things. And whenever we change anything in our business, there are those who perceive that they're losing and those that are perceived that are winning. And we will try to sort of, again, best as we can, balance those needs and attempt to accommodate all users equitably. Another challenge we have is pricing. And again, this is a model that's being used elsewhere. We do a fairly good job of pricing in the city of Toronto in terms of pricing the curb space, particularly for parking, in the areas that have the highest demand at the highest rate per hour. And again, the goal with on-street curbside parking tends primarily to provide short-term duration parking for user groups in a fairly convenient manner. And what we do here in Toronto is, again, we vary the price that we may pay anywhere from perhaps $1 an hour to up to $4 an hour throughout the city based on demands. In the downtown core, many locations are now $4 per hour. And again, our goal here is it's not necessarily revenue generation, but to ensure that anyone who has that short-term demand can easily and quickly access parking. So from a policy standpoint, we like to use pricing to ensure that people aren't using curb space any longer than they truly need to. And what we want to do there is basically the policy goal I think we're going to be heading into is always trying to price so that there's availability, at least on any curb face on a block, that you should be able to find parking so that we don't have people constantly circling, driving, looking for parking spaces. So again, pricing becomes an important mechanism that will be embedded within our plan. And then finally, enforcement. So enforcement's needed to just ensure that when we do create these rules, that the various user groups adhere to them as best we can. And again, the one commitment we'll have is to be dynamic and flexible in terms of evaluating, responding, and changing as conditions change. So curbside conflicts, and here we just have an image of a delivery truck on, I believe this is King Street. It's Queen Street, and there we go. Thank you, TTC board member. So anyway, this is just the complexity of a large city here. And again, I would say that Toronto is not necessarily unique in terms of facing these types of conditions. Obviously, with the streetcar operations, the impacts to anyone encroaching into these areas or taking capacity out when the streets are full of vehicles does impact streetcar operations. But again, as you can see along the right side of the image, we have a commercial strip here where there are often many small businesses in these locations. And again, this is not something like a Sobeys or a large supermarket. These are typically often mom and pop shops that have operations that may run from anywhere from 7 in the morning to perhaps only as late as 7 o'clock at night or even earlier. So one of the demands that they face is trying to get their goods into their business during, I'll say, the downtown business operating hours. So obviously these are situations that we like to discourage. And again, with sort of increasing traffic demands on our streets, when these vehicles take out a lane like this, they're often taking out 50% of the capacity of the road, creating a bottleneck, which again, that can spill back, creating other traffic issues and also impact the TTC operations as well. So again, a sort of condition that we are trying to, hopefully through policy, good policy, help to better alleviate in the future. The next photo we have is sort of just a complexity highlighting a delivery vehicle that has encroached over the cycle tracks, and this is on Sherbourne, I believe, and parking partially on a sidewalk as someone in a wheelchair is attempting to go by. So again, part of this is as we retrofit our city with different uses, we often have situations like this. And again, This is probably something that does not occur every day or maybe even once or twice a week, but in some locations that have high demand and high turnover, the demand for that site often does create conditions like this. So we do have situations where, again, our cycling infrastructure unit, they tend to try to work with stakeholders when they're putting in infrastructure like this. But again, as land uses change or things that we potentially didn't see happening occur, what we try to do is we try to sort of rectify the situation as best we can. So again, this is just highlighting some of the complexities that we face in terms of the demands for curbside. And in this image here as well, as you can see, because we put the cycle tracks in there, we've reduced the travel lanes here to 1 lane in each direction. So anything stopping that lane could functionally take out a travel lane or create a condition where vehicles are passing into oncoming traffic. So again, just something we need to be sensitive and think about as we modify our curbside spaces. All right, so our evaluation framework is what we're going to use to assess the merits of alternative strategies. And among other things, we want to look at the following. One is curbside efficiency and effectiveness now and in the future. So again, this is looking at what are the current curbside demands? Are there ways we can accommodate them in different ways? And again, what are, probably more importantly, what are future curbside usages? And then how can we proactively look at strategies that potentially can mitigate against future curbside conflicts? We want to factor in the needs and interest of our stakeholders. Again, better understanding who benefits, who's impacted, and then what are the outcomes of that. We do need to consider things like impact on traffic capacity and congestion. Likewise, in the downtown core, because of the presence of streetcars, it is particularly sensitive issue when streetcar vehicles need to get down the streets that they're on. So we're trying to manage that both sort of in a more comprehensive way, but again, curbside management is one piece of that pie. The financial costs and revenue opportunities. We highlighted this one again whenever we change curbside usages, particularly if we start restricting parking, which again I think we will likely be doing more and more of in the future. It does come with a revenue component. Again, that shouldn't necessarily drive our decision making, but I think it is something we need to factor in regarding finances. And then finally, implementation or phasing schedule. So again, this is thinking about how we unroll this, how we do things by trial and error, how we observe, and then how we modify moving forward. As I mentioned before, in conjunction with developing sort of the policies for this, we're going to be looking at sort of piloting it in a fairly condensed portion of the downtown core, probably the most complicated part of the city, and we feel if we can make it work there, then it will be transferable to other parts of the city as well. So the next slide is a list of all the folks we are consulting with. We have a list here, and I'll just quickly run through them. City councilors, this committee as well, city staff and transportation services, city planning, revenue services, municipal licensing and standard, EMS, fire, Toronto Police Services, the Toronto Film and Television Office, Toronto Parking Authority, Toronto Transit Commission, Cycle Toronto, local BIAs, the Canadian Automobile Association, Canadian Courier and Logistics Association, Ontario Trucking Association, Ontario Motor Coach Association, the general public, and other additional various interest groups. So just highlighting in here, you can see how each of these groups will likely bring their own lens to this. What we hope to do is truly try to take their input as best we can. Ultimately, there probably will be changes in some locations that some may like and some may not, but I think this is the sort of thing that hasn't been done thoroughly in Toronto in a good 20 years, and it's just time for us to sort of revisit how we use our curbside. So I'm almost done here. So the items under consideration, again, we want to look at the regulatory items, changes to existing parking peak period restrictions, changes to hours of permitted parking. We're going to look at operational changes, potentially looking at things like off-peak deliveries and other scheduled deliveries, ways to accommodate them. We want to look also at no parking during certain hours, potentially to create delivery windows. And just to highlight the difference, no parking permits active loading and unloading on curbsides for up to 15 minutes. No stopping means that you literally can't stop. So when we do have locations that say no parking, we are not saying it's an absolute prohibition of vehicle stopping, but if there's ways we can put no parking zones in place to help perhaps small businesses get their deliveries at certain times of day, let the delivery trucks come in, pull up right in front of the business that they want to unload, and then leave. That may be a model that we look to work with the delivery companies with. We're also going to look at technology. So again, we may look at doing something, if not out of the gate in the future, such as dynamic pricing, which means that we may see curbside parking prices change by time of day and by day of the week based on usage patterns. So how can you help? Again, we want to hear about successes or challenges that you are currently experiencing with curbside usages in the downtown core. Is there any data or input that you can provide that you feel could be useful for our study? Locations with frequent conflicts, locations where we consistently see trouble with getting things like accessible parking. And then finally, we have an online survey called the Curbside Management Survey. We would welcome your participation, ask you to take it, and also to share it with your circles for others so we can get as much input into this process as possible. So our next steps are basically to conduct stakeholder and general public consultation, again, looking for complete online and in-person surveys. We'll be doing an existing conditions review, which is almost completed. We'll be doing a best practice review. We'll be developing an evaluation framework for how we will sort of weigh many of these different choices. We'll collect information from all these steps and take them into consideration, and then view them through the evaluation framework. We'll bring forward initial strategies and policies for public feedback and consultation. And then ultimately our goal is to wrap up this project and come back with a policy program and perhaps new curbside mapping by the summer of 2016, which will be later this year. So at this point in time, I'd like to again thank you for your time. Hopefully this gave you a fairly thorough overview of the program, and I'm more than willing to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I suspect there may be some questions from the floor. Yin, I see your hand going up. You want to ask a few questions? Go ahead. You have the floor.
Just a quick question. I guess this group, and I'm speaking just mainly for myself, we are concerned with curb cuts, and that was kind of determined with a kind of, I don't know what you call it, study. So usually the curb cuts are at the corners, where people would cross. But I've noticed that there are curb cuts now that's not at corners of, intersections. So can you tell me why those curb cuts are put in?
So I believe the ones you're referring to are likely along the streetcar routes, and they're often perhaps 20 meters away from the curb. The new longer streetcars, the accessible location will be the rear door. So the ramps that we've been putting in place that are away from, I'll say, the front of the vehicle will permit persons with disabilities to enter the back doors of the streetcars. So we've created a ramp program, and I think we've installed several hundred at this point. And I think we'll have all the streetcar lines done this year, if I'm not mistaken. But the goal there is that as the new longer streetcars come online, we needed to create accessibility curbside to permit people from not having to walk all the way down the travel lane to access the back door. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, Councillor Carroll.
I suspect at the end of this question, you're just going to say, well, we'll have to do that with education. Because this is now it's Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, I was asking my daughter, who has autism but likes to independently go about town, about crossing the street. We were coming in on Richmond and turning onto Bay. This is a few weeks ago. And this morning I noticed a lot of cyclists there. So it's becoming a really busy bike lane. But we were coming in a few weeks ago and it was fairly new. And so I said, so Martha, how would you cross the street here? And she said something that I hadn't thought of. She said, I get scared when I get to bike lanes, because she said they're not all the same. So I don't know what to do when I get to them. And it struck me that might be a challenge both for her, but also for the visually impaired as well. You get there, and sometimes there's a separated bike lane, so there's an island. Am I supposed to just go there and then cross the rest of the way? And also she's scared because a lot of cyclists don't remember that pedestrians have the right of way. So it may be safe to cross, except that they can see that, well, the light's red, there are no cars coming, so I'm not going to put on the brakes. So there are the two things, the cyclist behavior, but also they're just visually not all the same. So it's a crossing challenge. You have to design them differently. Some are separated, some are sharrows, some are full bike lanes. But is there thought going into that the pedestrian knows exactly what to do when they get to a street that's now mixed with cars and cyclists?
I think the short answer is, I think it would be difficult to communicate. We are currently in a process of experimenting with different types of treatments. I would say that for any users, our recommendation is that a bike lane is no different than a vehicular travel lane. And so if you notice, what we don't do is we tend to keep the existing curbs and the detectable warning strips outside of the location of the bike lanes and the vehicular lanes. And so the intent is that treat it as an active travel lane. I think if we're seeing bad behavior, particularly at certain locations, I think that we can do additional education on it. But we are trying to sort of, at least the crosswalk will always be the crosswalk, and keeping that, the detectable warning strips should serve as your guidance as to when you're approaching, for lack of a better term, the roadway.
Right, right, yeah.
And we're slowly, I know, I mean, I think we're one of the leaders in Ontario, but we've been rolling out more and more of them. So hopefully, instead of the old sort of straight lines that used to guide you, we're getting more and more of the cast iron detectable warning strips out there. So folks with visual impairments can sort of see and feel when they're about to enter what's deemed the roadway. So
Okay.
Did I answer your question, Counselor?
Yeah, for as much as we can right now.
Yeah.
I think
Regarding
over
the different-
time, we'll
regarding
get
the different
cycling
treatments?
behaviors. I think over time, we'll get to the cyclist behavior. I think the more traffic there is on those bike lanes, they have to slow down because they'll be in traffic too. But I just found it interesting that she said, I feel like I can predict what the driver in the car is going to do better than I can predict what the bike's going to do. She learned the rule a long time ago, look at the driver, but for some reason, it's still hard to get eye contact with the cyclist. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm seeing nodding of heads, yeah. But I think it will come as their lanes get busier too.
And back to your first question, we are actually still experimenting, and as with many cities are right now, of sort of what we want as our standard moving forward. I think sort of, you know, each one of these, anything we've put in place has sort of come with some unique challenges. So we're sort of, I'll say, in a process of continuous refinement. So what we put in on Sherbourne is very different to what we put on Wellesley at this time, which is different than what we put on, you know, Queens Crescent. But we're looking at ways at which we can sort of, I'm not necessarily sure we're always going to have the same, but at least if we can have sort of a standard palette of 1 or 2 or 3, that will at least, I think, help the situation. So.
Excellent, excellent. On the delivery hours, I just had a comment, not a question.
Any other questions? Rahima?
It's more of an experience, not a question. At University Avenue, the Staples, I was leaving there, and they were filming a TV show, and they had cables all over the sidewalks and the curbs, and I had to take a 2-block detour just across the street.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will pass that along to our television and film office, and I think typically they're supposed to put mountable strips, and if you come across that situation, please don't hesitate to request any local bodies that you see working there to rectify the situation. It will, as with my world, our contractors that work for us and others often behave as they shouldn't. We're not always out there to monitor them, but if you see a situation, don't hesitate to raise it
Oh,
to
I
them,
raised it,
and then also raise it to us as well. So,
but I raised it to them, and they wouldn't budge,
okay.
believe me.
And so if you can provide any information on the date and time and location of that, we know who's out there, so we can have our film office speak with the production company and let them know that this isn't acceptable.
Oh, yeah, I have the name of the show. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Great. So everyone's watching. Any other questions? Actually, I have 3 quick questions. Going back to the study area, recognizing that your northern boundary is this sort of little jogged box to Dundas, is there a reason why it's stopping at Dundas? Because I recognize that you're cutting the downtown Yonge BIA in half. And then on top of that is the Bloor-Yorkville community, which has a density of small businesses.
Yes.
and probably one of the biggest challenges when it comes to curbside management with respect to the large delivery trucks. Is there an opportunity to expand those boundaries?
We'd be open to it. Again, the challenge will be is the more we take on, the likely more time and the longer it will take us to implement.
Okay.
And the one thing we do want to do, Counselor, I mean, is that this will be, all the best thinking on this, this will be a trial and error piece where we will put things out there and we will likely see problems that arise by changes we've made. So I think the footprint that we have shown is consistent with the original downtown transportation operations study. So just for ease of that that's why we selected the footprint that we did at this point. We're not opposed to it, but again, we would probably view this as, spending a year on looking at this between, say, mid-year 2016 and 17. If we see things working, probably looking at potentially doing a further rollout in 17 and 18 of additional locations within the city. So, I mean, one piece you may want to just weigh in on is we think we're picking one of the more complicated areas, but if you want to sort of help us prioritize where this might go moving forward, we'd be more than welcome.
I think I make that suggestion offline and send it to you in an email. Both those BIs have the resources to also add some very rich insight, just because they're studying the matter themselves.
Yes.
Another question regarding the challenges under the header of challenges. How will you prioritize the different users? Because, I mean, obviously in this community, I think that those, just as Rahima was saying, it's like, she didn't have the option of just jumping off the curb. She had to detour 2 blocks to get to her final destination. And there'll be others without those options. How will you prioritize the needs of those who require barrier-free access?
Yes, I think first and foremost, our goal for that will be to ensure that we do not make things any worse. So that's sort of, I think, the minimum standard. I'm sure in many ways we're going to be able to make it better, but I think that's where we want to start, is to ensure that we're not doing anything that creates additional barriers. We, Transportation Services, are taking the lead in terms of the application of AODA into public right-of-way. We have lots of areas for improvement on that front, but we are sort of incorporating it into our business, that it's our job to ensure the public realm is as barrier-free as possible. It will take us some time, particularly our interfaces with private property, but that is sort of, I'll say, an underlying fundamental in terms of how we do business.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question is with respect to trying to identify other cities that may have come up with their own solutions. I'm assuming that the study and the review that you have underway is going to also incorporate cities that could be even denser than City of Toronto, with streets more narrow than the City of Toronto, and how they've been able to coordinate their service and deliveries. I'm thinking, I was on the island of Venice. It's really difficult to get goods in and out, but they've managed to do it. Traveling through Asia, I think of the small, narrow streets in Tokyo with high rises, on average 60 stories and 70 stories into the sky. And businesses on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th levels, they've somehow figured out how to make the deliveries in using different types of delivery vehicles. So will those different cases be reviewed as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you see some cities where they have small vehicles. I think in Toronto, we don't really have the sort of, I'll say, the medieval streets, situations like that. But I think we occasionally see problems with things like tractor trailers coming in and making deliveries in the downtown core, which is great for the delivery company, but often imposes some real restrictions for the other. And again, I think, to be honest with you, at certain times of day, that maybe is an acceptable delivery model. The challenge we're also facing now is that in promoting sort of a downtown core that is no longer just business, but is a mix of residential, business, and hotels, I think we are looking to perhaps expand a pilot of off-peak deliveries. But the challenge with that is that, any noise these vehicles have to make when they back up. At one time, it was in a deserted business community in the downtown core. Now it's going to often be next to condos where overnight deliveries may not be as palatable. So.
You certainly have a difficult job ahead of you. But thank you very much. I don't think there are any other questions. I want to ask if we can actually have someone to, actually, I think Councillor Carroll had a comment.
Yeah, it was about the delivery hours, but I also wanted to comment with regards to the boundaries being what they are.
Yes.
I hear the chair loud and clear about there's valuable input from other areas, but just mindful that, you know, I don't know if there's any outside consultants helping with this report. If there are, and the contract was contingent on certain boundary areas, I'm fine with you taking that into account, because, you know, then you'll get the best results. And then the input coming from other areas would have to come through the surveying. But if it's possible, if it's being all done in-house, then there's a little more flexibility. With regards to delivery hours, I just note, and probably the staff have already told you this, Mr. Buckley wasn't at the City of Toronto the last time council went through this, but, so staff may have said, oh, we've been there before, we can't do the off-peak delivery hours, except that at that time, for one thing, it was being moved before council simply because New York City had just put in their boundaries and around delivery. You couldn't deliver between 6:30 and 10 o'clock. They had a really wide area where you couldn't deliver in Manhattan, and it was making the news, which is why great old Councillor Walker brought it forward here. It's an entirely different core city now. He was kind of mocked at the time because the proposed route turned out to be coincidentally the route from his home to City Hall. And he said, let's try this on Yonge Street from, say, St. Clair to Queen Street. And so there was lots of joking about it. It wasn't taken seriously at all. Now I hear councillors talking about it all the time. For suburban councillors, downtown councillors, I think it would be considered in a completely different vein now. And what's heartening is it is around non-vehicle traffic being the reason for it. Before it was, this is bothering cars, get these trucks out of here. It's quite different now. It is about the pedestrian, the cyclist, and all the rest of them. Pardon me. So that should be, I think, the most robust part of the study. And I really look forward to it. And I would also include in that the afternoon peak. Because many people, you know, when we talk about on the TTC, wherever possible, we'd like you to get out of Wheel-Trans and into the new low-floor accessible vehicles. And that's great, except that now you're out of the Wheel-Trans stream sort of thing. You're out of that appointment loop. And so the day you need it, because you know it's going to be the journey from hell on the way home from the doctor, because it's 4:30 or 5 o'clock by the time you're leaving wherever you've come downtown for an appointment. Now you're out of the loop, and for you to get a booking to get home on Wheel-Trans is super challenging. So to look at both morning and afternoon would be great, because if it's smooth access along the public realm, and we've got more mobility in the vehicles and rear door access, then they really can look at staying out of Wheel-Trans, but also navigating the public realm to stay in that one mode of transport. So I think restricted hours 2 times a day is more than warranted. And we still do have a pretty navigatable downtown core. So to ask them to do it all in off-peak, I don't think is a hardship. To ask a small shop to say, you know, if you're taking major deliveries 2 or 3 times a week, someone does have to come in at 6 a.m. That's the cost of doing business, and we're going to have to get there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. And will you also be moving to receive the staff presentation? Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing the report that's coming out this summer. And I think that the members of the committee will circulate the survey to you online, and you can hopefully help us disseminate it through your networks.
And again, we'll be doing some consultation, so as part of those processes, we welcome folks from all wide spectrums of interest to sort of come in and participate in that. The more information we can take in, the better.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're heading to our next item, which is the update on the recruitment process for the new term of the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. And Nicole actually has a quick update for us.
Thank you, Councillor. So as you know, we've advertised the recruitment opportunities earlier in the year through our public notice process through the clerk's office. We also advertise extensively through agencies that support people with disabilities. We've received over 40 applications, and I'd also like to mention that most of the current members of the committee have also reapplied. So we have a very diverse group of applicants with excellent qualifications. We've gone through and made a short list, and we will be interviewing 20 candidates on December 17th and 18th, and that will be for 12 available positions. And I'm expecting that we're going to probably have a decision made, hopefully, depending on vacations, we may have some decision by the end of the year, or if not, early January. We look forward to doing an orientation session and having our new term to start again in February.
So thank you very much, and I think that for those who are not reapplying because they've served such a long time, I want to just single out Archie Allison in particular, just because I think, Archie, you've mentioned to me you've been on this committee how many years? 12 years. So I want to thank Archie for his service. I think it's okay if we let you go. That is more than enough that you've given to us, so thank you very much. And of course, because our recruitment and interview process, I mean, I think we all recognize we're at the end of a year now. So the new committee will be reconstituted and serving out the rest of the term. So, okay, so thank you. Are there any questions to Nicole's report? No, pretty straightforward. Can I get a motion to receive? Oh, Yin has a question. Sorry, Yin.
So the transition time, so foreseeably, our next meeting would be a whole slew of new committee members, but the transition time, I mean, not transition, just the information passing on to the new members, is that totally rests with, I don't know, the office, or is there time for old members to, especially I'm thinking of the committees, the subcommittees that we formed.
I'm not sure how to answer that. When we will do an orientation with the new members. So if there are some updates, if existing work is happening at the subcommittee level, then we could certainly make arrangements to find, to gather that, to pass it on. Does that answer your question, Yin? I'm not sure if
I'm thinking if, I'm thinking of the three subcommittees, I think there are three. If somehow the work that we've done, if members of those subcommittees are not in the new committee, part of the new committee, then maybe there may be opportunities for us to somehow pass that information on. This is just a suggestion.
I appreciate that, and I will build that into the process, Yin. Thank you for making sure I was aware of that.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. Thank you. I think the transition plan should be fairly smooth, and as you can tell, we're still ironing out the pieces. One of the items that will be important for the new committee is just an orientation over how the committee works, how to make sure that we can prepare our motions, if possible, in advance, how to add items onto the agenda. So I think there is a recognition that between the last time this committee was constituted over the last term, we have somehow formalized things in a way that the request from the committee is to try to elevate the work that the committee does so that the rest of the corporation is aware that this committee, number one, exists, that we have an opportunity to comment on items and policy items that are coming to council, and hopefully we've been able to do that. There's now the public deputations are made of this committee, and I recognize that before they were not. So the dynamics have changed somewhat, and we wanted to make sure that whoever's coming on next time will be given that information, that they can be prepared to contribute as an active and energized member. Okay, so do we have a motion to receive the information? Thank you, Stephanie. Great. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm going to call for the speaker. There was a speaker that was registered to speak to the item, and I apologize for that. Mr. Mark Dukes? I don't see him in the room. Just Mr. Dukes, are you listening somewhere? Okay, I'm going to, do we have any other speakers on this particular topic? update on the recruitment process for the new term of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. Okay, that was my third attempt to call for deputants and speakers. We're going to close that. And can I get a motion to receive the item then? Sorry, it was Stephanie first. Thank you. Great. Okay, so moving right along, we have item number 4, which is accessible bus route, Eglinton Avenue East and Rumsey Road. And this was held by Councillor Carroll. And I can provide just a quick 3-sentence update. The TTC did receive the letter from Terry Lynn that was made available to them. We did ask them to try to respond to this committee by this meeting date, and we have not received the response in time yet. But we are fortunate enough to have a commissioner sitting on our committee. Perhaps Councillor Carroll can provide us some feedback.
I just, since I first said that I wanted to hold the item, the chair of ACAT is here, and I just checked with him, and he doesn't remember this communication ever making its way all the way to a TTC committee meeting. He may want to comment on where he understands it to be at from ACAT's perspective, but I want to follow it up with the actual commission.
Okay, so let's, if we can, I'm just going to direct the, just because we have our friend in attendance of the meeting, is there anything that you can provide for us today?
Sure. I looked at the item on the agenda, and ACAT position, although it did not come to ACAT, however, ACAT position is in support with I read Terry Lynn letter. It makes sense to us. However, I understand the staff itself, the service planning department, they are the one who are responsible to check every aspect if this possible or not.
Yeah.
If they have a problem, they will come to us to ask for our advice. Since they didn't, I guess it's still in process maybe, I'm just assuming. I was hoping also that somebody will speak to it today, but for sure you will receive a response. I think it's an item on the agenda, and
Okay.
I don't know what to say.
Okay.
But ACAT is in supportive of the item. We do see the reasonable request, and it make a lot of sense to us too. So,
Okay, thank you very much. There's oftentimes a lot of agreement between our committees, I'm
Oh, yes.
sure. Terry Lynn?
I did speak with Tina about it because there seemed to be some miscommunication of the history of the letter. This letter was initially approved in 2013 by the committee, and it was also sent to Karen Stintz and ACAT, and it was also approved by several community groups that are Leaside community groups. It was supported by Bob Bell, who was the former president of UHN. And it also went to Holland Bloorview and adjacent communities as well. So the reason I resent it out was just for approval to get the date changed and the counselors that it was going to change. So Councillor Burnside, current ACAT, and also the current TTC chair.
okay.
But this letter has been in its original form. I didn't change the letter at all. Has been floating around for a couple of years.
Okay, so it's, so we're really keen to have a response from the TTC then. Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, so I suspect what's happened which was a problem in the last term of office, that it didn't actually get entered as an item on the TTC's agenda. So if it actually gets entered as an item of correspondence and it's documented that it was handed to Mitch Stambler to figure out how many people need it, who's doing this, and who's having to make this journey on foot, he may have been handed that to do that. But if it's not sitting on the agenda, at the end of the agenda is outstanding items, and where is it at? And it might say, we don't know yet, we're still studying it. But no one loses track of the fact that it's an item that has to have a result. And I think it somehow did not get officially entered. So, and as it happens, there is a TTC meeting this week, so on Wednesday. So I'll commit to the committee. What I'm going to do is make sure that it actually becomes an item, actually gets entered. But I'm also going to ask the TTC communicate to Metrolinx, because it seems to me that while we need something in the short term, it's also important that going forward, because all of those agencies is, you know, a lovely, well-funded facility with a growing patient load, all up along that road, that it seems to me that what's really important is that Metrolinx, either at their Laird Crosstown Station or their Bayview Crosstown Station, better have a really well-designed, accessible spot where if we were going to run a community bus from a crosstown station, it has to be well-designed so they could easily run a fully accessible community bus that gets you to every single one of those agencies. It was sort of struck me between the eyes when I read this letter, reading the agenda, because I realized, okay, for my place of privilege, I never thought of that. I spent, for the first 7 years of my daughter's life, I spent half my time at Bloorview, either visiting doctors or just taking the special needs swimming classes endlessly. And the mess of cars there, if anything, I would think every agency desperately would love to get rid of the number of cars and Wheel-Trans vehicles pouring in there, because there's no other way to get there. Sometimes you can't get near the parking lot because there's a queue of Wheel-Trans vehicles all bringing individual people from different parts of town. Even that's hard to coordinate. So just to have one community bus going from the future Bayview Crosstown Station, going up there and stopping at every agency would be amazing from any perspective, because it would be starting at the CNIB and all the way into the Donwoods, serving every single one of them with one universal vehicle. It's a no-brainer. So what I'll do is enter it into the list of outstanding items at the TTC so they get a painful reminder every month at the back of the agenda until we have a result, but also make sure that they immediately communicate to Metrolinx that this has to be factored into the station. I would think preferably at Bayview, because then they go straight up and with one right turn, they're starting drop-offs from CNIB all the way in. Yeah. Okay.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Terry Lynn.
Just for information, because I don't want this to, for this to be shared later, and then they're like, oh, Terry Lynn never told us. But there is a Wheel-Trans bus that gets dropped off at the Rumsey Cardiac Center, and it leaves from Davisville, and I think it runs not every hour, but about that.
Yeah, but it has a sort of ad hocery about it too, I understand. Yeah. So to start looking forward to the fact that there will soon be a rail station on a new line, therefore an accessible line, and so close to it that it would make a very easy route. And it also makes it possible for people coming from far, far out in the West End. The crosstown is going to be such an amazing line in terms of getting people easily to the point of Bayview and Eglinton 5 minutes away. If they haven't factored that in, that has to be checked ASAP, yeah.
Well, thank you, Councillor Carroll, and with the gratitude of the committee for your privileged position as being a commissioner on the TTC, we'll look forward to seeing that item added onto the agenda. And Terry Lynn, I'm sorry that it's taken 2 years of advocacy on your part to get us to this stage, but it's now in the capable hands of Councillor Carroll. So we will receive this for information. I'm going to see that moved by Terry Lynn. And then moving on to the next item, it is the accessibility at the new men's emergency shelter at 850, 854 Bloor Street West. I'm going to call for speakers at this point in time. We do have one speaker who's registered to speak, and it was the same speaker who missed our last item, Mr. Mark Dukes. Our first call, can I have Mr. Mark Dukes come to the front of the room? No? Are there any other speakers on this particular item? No, I'm going to close that and bring it back into the committee then. Again, committee members, item number 5, you have a letter from Terry Lynn, who's very active. Thank you. Are there any particular, Terry, since it's your letter, do you want to speak to it?
I just thought that writing the letter, and I know that Tracy also did a lot of work on the letter as well. She's not here right now. But I think it helps speak to the accessibility points that we want to highlight and make sure happens in this particular men's shelter to increase accessibility to in shelters for people in the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to see that you, I'm taking it that you're moving the contents of the letter. This letter will go along to the executive committee.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, is there someone to speak to it? Oh,
I'm from Shelter Support and Housing. My name is Deirdre. And I just want to say that Shelter Support and Housing has seen the letter and is in support of it.
great, thank you very much.
I do have a question. I was going to ask if there are any staff present. The question is just whether or not, if this is a new facility being built, and from my understanding of AODA, if we're building a new system, a new facility, whether it's a retrofit of an existing building purchased or a new building being constructed, does it not have to meet AODA standard, the future standard at this point?
I believe so, yes. This is not a new, it is an existing building, but
Yeah, but even if you're going to open a new service in it, do you not have to retrofit it to AODA guidelines right now anyway, at least if not the whole facility, at least on a percentage basis in all the common areas?
yeah, our providers are required to adhere to all of that, all of the legislation, as well as our own standards. So they would have to meet all of those requirements. It's not my file per se, but we are, the Shelter Support and Housing is requiring that they make it accessible.
So then the only other question I would have then, and this speaks to Madam Chair's report about trying to change our institution, our corporation to actually put the lens on it, you should actually consult this committee to make sure that in meeting those guidelines, you're meeting them in ways that this committee can tell you will actually work. So who's being consulted to make sure you're not only meeting the guidelines, but in a way that doesn't drive us nuts when it's too late to do anything about it? Who's being consulted on it?
It's not my file. I know that they have been consulting with the community, but it's not, I can't answer that question. I can suggest, if the committee would like, we could arrange to have a presentation at your next meeting.
I think that would be entirely agreeable, and I see that Councillor Layton has just popped in, and we're happy to have you, Councillor Layton, because it's actually in his ward, and we had a quick conversation about this earlier, about the men's shelter on Bloor Street, and whether or not it would be completely barrier-free and fully accessible. Councillor Layton, you want to jump in on this?
Yes, my understanding is as part of the renovation, they're installing a elevator at the front of the building that will go up to the second floor, which is the shelter, and the basement, which is where the services will be. And I believe in the basement there are the facilities for showering and are all, perhaps not entirely barrier-free, but there are barrier-free facilities there. Is my understanding. I can confirm. I'm getting a head nod. So
I'm sorry, just a follow-up comment. Now I rest my case why you have to consult with this committee, because while those are great things, what Terry's saying is you could do all those things in the common areas, and surprise, surprise, I can't turn my scooter around right beside my bed. Yeah.
So, Councillor, there was a request to have the Shelter Support Housing Administration staff come before the next committee meeting, which is in February, to provide us with a presentation on how are they making this facility barrier-free, universally accessible. And I think that what we're asking for is a presentation on how to make sure that all our facilities moving forward, whether it's retrofit and obviously built new, it's easier to comply with, but that there is a strategy to make all the city facilities barrier-free. Okay, so we'll follow up with a request to the general manager's SSHA for that presentation at the next committee. Okay, Terry?
I just also wanted to say that the letter's not perfect, but I think it highlights some of the tensions between, okay, we've met the building code like all of the building code requirements, but in the building code requirements, it doesn't stipulate that services have to be accessible, right? And the idea of accessible services within the AODA is a little bit fuzzy as well. So that was the purpose behind writing the letter and trying to highlight some of those things. Because you can have ramps and you can have elevators, but then you can have spaces within an AODA compliant building that are not accessible.
Okay. It's well noted. Stephanie, you want to speak?
Thank you, and I would just add that accessibility isn't just about mobility as well, so accessibility for visually impaired and for deaf and hard of hearing as well are issues that need to be looked at.
Okay. Thank you very much for that reminder. I'm going to ask Terry Lind, motion to receive. Okay, thank you very much. All in favor? Oh, sorry. I'm going to request it offline. We'll just bring them in as a presentation item. Were you busy typing a motion? Oh, actually, okay. Yeah, we'll get it done. So, I was trying not to put undue stress on the clerk with on-the-fly motions, because Melissa in the corner is taking notes, so it'll be a follow-up item on behalf of the chair. Okay, so item number 6, actually, it is our final item, is the City of Toronto's recruitment strategy. And of course, it's another letter from Terry Lind, but I think it's also one that is of great concern to all members of the committee with respect to the employment strategy of the City of Toronto and how do we actually ensure that we can have a workforce that represents the population that we serve. Calling for speakers, our first registered deputant is Mr. Mark Dukes, who I believe is still not in the room, and calling for other speakers. And the final call for Mr. Dukes. Okay, so we're going to bring this back to the floor of the committee. There's a recommendation before us to the executive committee that the recommendation in the letter of Terry Lind be approved. Terry, I believe Terry Lind, you have a motion. Do you want to speak to that now?
So this motion was collaboratively done, and there's 3 parts to it. So it says that the executive committee requests the executive director, human resources, and city solicitor, and the director, equity, diversity, and human rights to do 3 things. A is to make a presentation to Disability Access, Inclusion, and Advisory Committee that explains how the recruitment of equity-seeking groups, such as the disability community, takes place and whether there is a standardized process across city divisions. B, explore options to collect more information on persons with disabilities in order to monitor the progress on the recruitment strategy. And C, review the possibility of making an annual presentation to the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee to provide an update on the recruitment strategy. And I just wanted to note that B, to collect information on persons with disabilities in order to monitor the progress of the recruitment strategy. This particular motion has been before the committee in previous years. Yep, that's the entire motion.
Okay. Are there any questions of the mover of the motion? And I think it's fairly, is that your hand going up, Ian?
Well, I just want to make a comment.
Yeah, it's fine.
I did attend the city's job fair, annual job fair at the reference library, and I've noticed that there's very, very little understanding of recruitment of persons with disabilities there. And by extension, I was referred to an employment center that's funded by the city or that works, whatever the term is, that's the city's employment center. I went there, and again, noticing that the staff really has no idea how to deal with me. So I think it's one thing to say that the city is an inclusive employer, but it's not going out there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Might as well get it out now. Okay, Terry Lind?
I would just say with some job postings with the city, a lot of the requirements that I've seen are not necessarily bona fide requirements, but they would be restricting particular applicants. So like the requirement to drive, even though that's not necessarily bona fide in the position. And some other pieces, like in the recruitment process, that are not, that could be modified, specifically for positions that should include people with disabilities better. That's what I've noticed.
Well, I think there's, Monica, is your hand going up? Go ahead.
Given my organization deals specifically with employment of persons with disabilities, I was just wondering in my brain, I know we've tried in the past to have job fairs with the city, and it hasn't always worked out very well, because there's been a sort of a, I'm not exactly, like a wall or something where they didn't want to listen to what we were saying about what they need to do for the job fair. So there's some work that needs to be done there. It's definitely an area that should be looked at in the coming committee, than in the new committee, because it's very simple, but I think it terrifies a lot of people still because they don't understand. So.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from the committee members around the table is that there's a lot more work that the City of Toronto can do, so we actually line up our actions with the words and the motto of the city. The City of Toronto did have a accessibility symposium. It was the very first time we actually hosted this, and the symposium brought about 200 people together at the Chestnut Conference Center around the corner on Chestnut Street, and there was presentations from other corporate employers such as Bell Canada and Iron Mountain with respect to how do we actually ensure that our workplace can accommodate people of different abilities, and I think there was some learnings there, and certainly I think it was the very first time that we did it. So it's given the history of the City of Toronto and how big this corporation is and how many people we employ, the fact that it was the first time the issue was tackled is probably late, but recognizing moving forward, I do believe it's actually something that this new city manager is going to put some priority on. He's spoken at the Access, Equity and Human Rights Awards presentation for those who were able to attend, and his remarks around access in particular, I think, illustrated that there was a real understanding and a personal desire to do better for the corporation. So thank you. Monica?
Another comment, I just want to say that it was a very brilliant day. I had managed to make the organization and the topics covered were just fabulous. So it was a great effort.
I think the feedback from the participants is that they walked away with some really rich learnings too. And those attendees were people employed at the City of Toronto with HR responsibilities. So their job is to go off and recruit and bring people into the corporation. So it was a symposium designed for them. Councillor Carroll?
I can't remember if you introduced or not. I just wanted Yin to know, who just told us her experience as a secret shopper, that the director of Equity, Diversity and Human Rights actually is here. She came in halfway through the meeting. So I can't remember whether or not you mentioned that Uzma was here. So just so that Yin knows, she actually did hear that very depressing news about a job fair. And all of the committee members are acting as secret shoppers throughout our system. So just so you know.
Can I have what?
Go ahead, Yin.
I am in this job-seeking mode, so it's not really that secret, but I went to another job fair specifically for persons with disabilities. It was held, I think TDSP sponsored, and I don't know the relationship between the city and TDSP. And what's disturbing to me is that they required your social insurance number when I registered, it was not stated. When I went all the way there, and it was in Scarborough, Markham Road and whatever, and that's a long way. You get there, and they said, we want all your, private information, birthday, telephone number, SIN number. And I thought, why would you, and they say, if you don't give it to us, you can't attend. For people with disabilities, we're easily intimidated. And I just don't know why such practices even exist at a job fair, supposedly sponsored by TDSB, which is also a And sometimes I just don't know where to go, you know? So if you go to your Toronto, City of Toronto employment centers, you go to these job fairs that's supposedly sponsored by the city, and you face these attitudinal and restrictive regulations that has no logic to me. And yet we don't know the recourse for the general public. So these things are very concerning, and I really hope the city will look into it.
So thank you very much, Ian. We still have Terry Lynn's motion, which is on the floor. It's so moved. All in favor? So passed. Okay. Thank you very much. Lots of work ahead of us. Looking forward to the upcoming year. So we've actually concluded the agenda in a timely fashion. Sometimes we like to drag on. This time we're much more efficient. For those members who are here and all the staff, I want to wish everyone all the best for the holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. This is the final day. Light the 8th candle, and Happy Kwanzaa. And wishing you and your family all the very best. We'll see you. Mostly in the 2016 year. Thank you.
So marry the two. So something
Well, that too.
Just like a running jump fist bump.
Fist bump.
All right?
Like the youth employment program.
Yeah.
It needs to be generically more inclusive. Well, until you get to the point where we become generically more inclusive, we need to do bits and pieces to create some kind of track record. But just hold me. Yeah, but I mean, what the heck is she talking about? What happened? I don't know. So she's one of the I don't know what she is. She said that the staff, what was the other woman who said, I wrote down their concern. What organization is she from? She said that we don't work with her. Why? And I don't know, and she's spoken to you, right? But she seemed to be invited, her organization, and provides employment, and provides employment. Who is she? I don't buy it.
Who is she? Who is that lady?
No, she gone?
No, but with the clerk.
Is that her up here?
With the clerk.
Underneath the counter sign?
Excuse me. Who was the lady that was sitting that said she... The city fair event? No, not with no, yeah, maybe it was. Sorry, I've got to just the one that was sitting. She mentioned not the bona fide requirements. Sorry, I was scribbling down different issues that people had. Trying to have job fairs with the city, but they didn't want to listen. Lynn Brown. Yin. No, she's not Asian. She wasn't Asian. She had red hair that was sitting kind of...
Oh, no.
The one name? Monica? Yes. Sorry. Monica. So where's she from? What's her agency?
You know what, I'll find out from Nicole and let you know.
Oh, it's Monica Winkler, but we don't know her agency.
Yeah,
Okay,
but I'm assuming they provide employment.
right. Okay. Okay, I mean, it's just that we're